Victoria Ashford's heels clicked against the marble floor of her penthouse lobby at 2:47 inches the afternoon, 7 hours earlier than anyone expected her. The sound echoed through the empty space like gunshots, each step a reminder that something had gone terribly wrong. Her chest felt tight, compressed by invisible hands that had been squeezing since the board meeting that morning, since Marcus had stood in that glass conference room and smiled at her like a stranger, since she realized that the man she'd built an empire beside for 12 years had been systematically destroying her from within. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an electrical hum that matched the ringing in her ears, and she pressed the elevator button with a trembling finger, watching her reflection fracture across the polished brass doors. She looked like a ghost of herself. The elevator ascended with agonizing slowness, each floor a countdown to the sanctuary she desperately needed. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the surface. 43 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Global Industries. Net worth, somewhere north of $8 billion. And in one morning, she had discovered that her Chief Financial Officer, the man she trusted with every number, every projection, every secret her company held, had been siphoning funds through shell corporations for 3 years. The federal investigation would go public by tomorrow morning. Her company's stock would crater. Her reputation would be torn apart by financial journalists who had been waiting years for her to stumble. But none of that compared to the email she had found buried in the encrypted files her head of security had delivered to her office. Asterisk, she's too cold to notice. She's too busy counting her billions to see what's right in front of her. Victoria Ashford doesn't have a heart. She has a balance sheet. Asterisk. Marcus had written that. Marcus, who had held her hand at her father's funeral. Marcus, who she had considered one of the few people in the world who actually knew her. Before we dive into this story, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is right now. Someone near you might be watching too. And don't forget to subscribe to support and appreciate the work we do on this channel. The elevator doors opened on the 52nd floor with a gentle chime that sounded obscenely cheerful. Victoria stepped into her private hallway, her legs moving on autopilot even as her mind spiraled through calculations and consequences. She needed to call her lawyers. She needed to prepare a statement. She needed to figure out which members of her executive team had been complicit and which had been kept in the dark like she had been. She needed to breathe. Her hands shook as she reached for her door, the biometric lock recognizing her fingerprint instantly. The mechanism clicked open, and she pushed through into the silence of her penthouse, 10,000 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Custom Italian furniture positioned with mathematical precision, abstract art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime hanging on walls the color of winter storms. It had never felt emptier. Victoria dropped her briefcase on the entrance table with a hollow thud and kicked off her heels, leaving them scattered on the pristine white marble. Her stockinged feet made no sound as she moved deeper into the apartment, past the kitchen that gleamed with stainless steel appliances she never used, past the living room that looked like a photograph from an architecture magazine, toward the master bedroom where she could finally fall apart in private. That was when she heard it. A voice, low and urgent, coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Victoria froze, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs with a force that made her dizzy. She never had visitors. Her housekeeper came on Mondays and Thursdays. Her personal assistant had a key but would have announced herself. The security in this building was supposed to be impenetrable billionaire-grade protection that had cost her a fortune to install. The voice came again, clearer this time. Male, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back to the elevator, to call security. But fury overtook fear in her chest, hot and sharp. After the morning she had endured, after the betrayal that was still burning through her veins like poison, someone had the audacity to break into her home? Victoria moved forward on silent feet, her body coiled with tension. Her phone was in her pocket. She could call for help in seconds. But first, she needed to see who had violated her sanctuary. The voice was coming from her study, the room where she kept her personal files, her private records, the documents that even her lawyers did not have access to. The door was slightly ajar, and through the narrow gap, she could see movement, a shadow shifting across the wall. Her fingers curled into fists. She approached the door with the same controlled precision she used in hostile business negotiations, each step measured and deliberate. The voice grew clearer as she neared, and with a shock of recognition that jolted through her entire body, she realized she knew it. Miguel, her night janitor. The man who cleaned her office building after hours, who she passed occasionally in the hallways when she worked late, who always nodded respectfully and moved his cart out of her way. She had seen him 100 times in the 5 years since the cleaning company had assigned him to her floor. She knew his first name only because it was stitched on his uniform. What was he doing in her private penthouse? Victoria pushed the door open with more force than she intended, the heavy wood swinging wide to reveal the scene inside. Her study looked wrong, the curtains drawn when she always kept them open, the desk lamp casting harsh shadows across the room. And there, standing near her filing cabinet with a phone pressed to his ear, was Miguel. But he was not alone. Huddled in the corner of her study, pressed against the bookshelf like a frightened animal, was a child. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with dark, tangled hair and enormous eyes that reflected the lamplight like a trapped creature. She was wearing clothes that were too thin for November, a threadbare jacket that had seen better years, and shoes with holes along the soles. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and her small body trembled with visible shakes that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. "No, listen to me," Miguel was saying into the phone, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "You cannot tell them where we are. I do not care what they promised you. I do not care about the money. If you tell them, they will kill her. Do you understand? They will kill this little girl." Victoria's hand reached for the light switch without conscious thought. The overhead lights blazed to life, flooding the room with brightness that made everyone flinch. Miguel spun toward her, his phone clattering to the floor, his face drained of color so quickly that Victoria thought he might collapse. The little girl made a small whimpering sound and pressed herself harder against the bookshelf, as if she could merge with the wood and disappear. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Victoria opened her mouth to demand an explanation, to ask what the hell was happening in her home, to call security and have this man arrested for breaking and entering. But before she could speak, Miguel crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hand shooting out to press against her mouth with enough force to push her back against the doorframe. His other hand gripped her shoulder, holding her in place. His eyes, dark and wild with desperation, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent ice water through her veins. "Shut up," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do not say a word." Victoria's mind went blank with shock. In 43 years of life, no one had ever touched her like this. No one had ever dared. She was Victoria Ashford. She commanded boardrooms. She controlled billions. She destroyed careers with a single phone call. And yet here she stood, silenced by her janitor, unable to move as he held her against the wall of her own study. "They are listening," Miguel continued, his breath hot against her ear. His hand remained firmly over her mouth, preventing any sound from escaping. "Right now, they are listening to every word we say. Your apartment is not safe. You are not safe. That little girl is not safe. And if you make one sound, if you alert them that we are here, they will come. And when they come, Miss Ashford, we are all going to die." The words hit her like physical blows. Victoria's eyes widened, searching his face for signs of insanity, for the madness that would explain this impossible situation. But what she saw there was not madness. It was terror. Pure, undiluted terror. And behind him, pressed against her bookshelf, the little girl watched her with eyes that held the same fear, the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly what death looked like. Miguel slowly removed his hand from Victoria's mouth, his gaze never leaving hers. "Please," he whispered. "Please, Miss Ashford. I know how this looks. I know you have questions. But I am begging you, do not speak. Do not move. Do not do anything until I can explain." Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mouth opened, words forming on her tongue. "Where are the microphones?" she breathed, so quietly. The sound was barely audible, even in the silence. Miguel's expression flickered with something that might have been relief or surprise, or both. He pointed toward the ceiling vent, then the lamp on her desk, then the decorative clock on her mantel. 3 locations, 3 listening devices planted in her private sanctuary. "How long?" Victoria mouthed the words without sound. "2 days," Miguel whispered back. "Maybe 3. The implications crashed through her mind like dominoes falling in rapid succession. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone had violated her most private space. Someone had been listening to her phone calls, her conversations, her life. And somehow, her night janitor had discovered it. Victoria looked past Miguel to the little girl, who was now watching them both with wide, terrified eyes. The child's lips were trembling, and she clutched something to her chest. A small stuffed rabbit that had lost most of its fur, held together with what looked like duct tape. "Who is she?" Victoria asked, the words no more than a breath of air. Miguel's jaw tightened. "Her name is Elena, and the people who are listening, they are the same people who killed her mother 3 days ago." The world tilted sideways. Victoria's knees went weak, and she had to press her hand against the wall to keep herself upright. She had woken up this morning in a world she understood, a world of corporate betrayal and financial scandals, of problems that could be solved with lawyers and money and strategic planning. That world had just shattered completely. "We need to move," Miguel said, his voice still barely audible. "We need to get out of this apartment right now. If they heard your elevator arrive, if they know you are home early, they will send someone. We have maybe 5 minutes before Jested." A sound cut through his words, distant but unmistakable. The elevator, ascending. Miguel's face went white. "We are out of time." The mechanical whir of the elevator shaft vibrated through the walls. Each passing floor, a countdown to something Victoria's mind refused to fully comprehend. Miguel moved with the speed of someone who had planned for this exact moment, crossing to Elena in 3 swift strides and scooping the little girl into his arms. She made no sound, burying her face against his shoulder with the practiced silence of a child who had learned that noise meant danger. "The service stairs," Victoria heard herself say, her voice returning with sudden clarity. "Through the kitchen. There's a staff exit that connects to the parking garage." Miguel's eyes snapped to hers, surprise flickering across his features. "You know the service routes?" "I designed this building." The words came out sharper than she intended, adrenaline burning away the shock that had paralyzed her moments before. "I know every exit, every camera, every blind spot in the security system. Follow me." She did not wait for him to respond. Years of commanding executive meetings kicked in, transforming terror into action. Victoria moved through her study door and into the hallway, her mind already calculating routes and timing. The elevator was at the 48th floor. 4 floors below them. They had maybe 30 seconds. Her stockinged feet made no sound on the marble as she ran toward the kitchen, Miguel's heavier footsteps and Elena's quiet breathing following close behind. The penthouse stretched out before her like a maze. She suddenly saw with new eyes, not as the sanctuary she had built, but as a cage with too few exits. "Who are they?" Victoria demanded as they reached the kitchen, her hands already working the hidden latch behind the wine rack. The panel swung open to reveal a narrow service corridor lined with industrial lighting. "Who killed her mother?" "People with more money than you," Miguel said, and the words hit her like a slap. "People who think a little girl saw something she should not have seen." The elevator chimed. 52nd floor. Victoria's heart stopped. They were out of time. "Go," she commanded, pushing Miguel toward the service corridor. But her own feet refused to move. Her apartment, her home. These people, whoever they were, had violated it, had planted devices in her private space, had turned her sanctuary into a hunting ground. Rage surged through her chest, hot and vicious. "Miss Ashford, we need to." I said go. Victoria grabbed the wine bottle nearest to her, a 1,947 Chateau d'Yam, worth $40,000, and hurled it at the floor. Glass exploded across the marble with a crash that reverberated through the penthouse. She seized another bottle, then another. Crystal and aged wine sprayed across her pristine kitchen like a crime scene. Miguel stared at her as if she had lost her mind. Perhaps she had. "When they get here," Victoria said, her voice deadly calm, "they're going to find exactly what they expect. A billionaire who came home drunk and angry. A woman who smashes expensive things because she can afford to replace them." She grabbed a chair and shoved it hard against the counter, letting it clatter to the floor. "They're going to hear chaos. And while they're trying to make sense of it, we're going to disappear." Understanding dawned in Miguel's eyes. He nodded once, then turned and ran down the service corridor with Elena clutched tight against his chest. Victoria followed, pulling the wine rack panel closed behind her. The moment it clicked shut, she heard it, the sound of her front door opening. Not the biometric lock she used, something else. Something that bypassed her security entirely. They had a key to her kingdom. The service corridor was narrow and utilitarian. Nothing like the luxury of her apartment. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, and the concrete floor was cold beneath her feet. Victoria ran, her breath coming in harsh gasps, her silk blouse sticking to her back with sweat. Ahead of her, Miguel moved with surprising speed for a man carrying a child, taking the stairs, 2 at a time. "How did you know?" Victoria gasped as they descended past the 51st floor. "About the microphones. About them coming. How did you know?" "Because I used to be one of them." Miguel's voice echoed in the stairwell, raw with something that sounded like shame. "Before I became a janitor. Before I decided I could not do it anymore." "I know how they think. I know how they operate. And when I found Elena hiding in a dumpster behind your building 3 nights ago, covered in her mother's blood, I knew exactly who would come for her." Victoria's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the railing to steady herself, forcing her body to keep moving. Her mother's blood? "They killed her in an alley 6 blocks from here, shot her twice, and left her to die in the rain." Miguel's voice cracked. Elena watched. She was supposed to die too, but she ran. She ran and she hid and she ended up behind the building where I was taking out the trash. The image burned through Victoria's mind, a little girl, soaked and terrified, crouching in garbage to escape murder. Her stomach turned violently. "Why didn't you take her to the police?" Miguel's laugh was bitter. "Because the police are how they found her mother the first time, Miss Ashford. These people have connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. If I walk into a precinct with this little girl, she is dead within 24 hours. And so am I." They reached the parking garage level, the service door opening onto a dimly lit expanse of concrete and luxury vehicles. Victoria's midnight blue Bentley sat in its reserved spot, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Next to it, a silver Mercedes she barely drove. A Range Rover she had purchased for winter weather but used maybe twice a year. All useless, all connected to her name, her identity, her carefully constructed life. "We cannot take your cars," Miguel said, as if reading her thoughts. "They will have tracking on all of them." "I know." Victoria scanned the garage with new eyes, looking past the obvious toward the forgotten. There in the far corner, covered with a tarp and dust from months of neglect, her father's old pickup truck, a 1985 Ford that she had kept for sentimental reasons after he died, unable to sell the vehicle he had driven to construction sites when he was building his first developments. She had not started it in over a year. "There," she pointed. "That truck. It's registered to a company I dissolved 5 years ago. No GPS, no computers, just an engine and metal." Miguel stared at the ancient vehicle, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, a reassessment, perhaps, of who she was beneath the billionaire exterior. They ran to the truck together. Victoria yanking off the tarp with strength she did not know she possessed. The fabric pooled on the concrete, releasing a cloud of dust that made Elena cough softly against Miguel's shoulder. Victoria's hands shook as she reached above the rear tire, feeling for the magnetic key box her father had always kept there. Her fingers closed around metal, the key. "Get in," she commanded, unlocking the doors. The hinges groaned with disuse, and the interior smelled like old leather and motor oil. Miguel climbed into the passenger seat, settling Elena on his lap. The little girl's eyes met Victoria's in the rearview mirror, enormous and dark, and filled with a terror no child should ever know. Victoria turned the key. The engine coughed, died. "Come on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Come on, please." She tried again. The engine sputtered, struggling. Behind them, the service door burst open. Two men in dark suits emerged, their heads swiveling as they scanned the garage. "Miss Ashford." "I know." Victoria turned the key a third time, pressing the gas pedal with trembling feet. "I know. I know. I." The engine roared to life. She threw the truck into reverse and gunned it, tires squealing against concrete as she backed out of the space. The men were running now, one of them reaching into his jacket. Victoria shifted into drive and floored the accelerator, the old truck lurching forward with more power than its age suggested. They shot toward the garage exit, the gate arm rising too slowly. Victoria did not slow down. The truck smashed through the wooden barrier with a crack that sent splinters flying, and then they were out, merging into Manhattan traffic with horns blaring around them. In the passenger seat, Miguel held Elena close, his hand pressed protectively over her head. In the mirror, Victoria saw the little girl's eyes squeeze shut, her small fingers gripping the duct-taped rabbit like a lifeline. "Where are we going?" Miguel asked, his voice rough. Victoria's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She did not have an answer. For the first time in her adult life, she did not have a plan, did not have control, did not have any idea what came next. Her apartment was compromised. Her company was under federal investigation. Her CFO had betrayed her. And now she was fleeing unknown assassins in her dead father's pickup truck with her night janitor and a traumatized child. This morning, she had been Victoria Ashford, billionaire, CEO, untouchable force in the business world. Tonight, she was just a woman in a truck, running from something she did not understand. "Miss Ashford?" Miguel's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Where are we going?" Victoria made a turn onto a side street, then another, weaving through traffic with no destination in mind. The city lights blurred past the windows. Familiar streets, suddenly foreign. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words caught in her throat. Because the truth was devastating. She did not know where to go. She did not know who to trust. Everyone in her life, everyone she had relied on, everyone she had built her empire with, suddenly felt like a potential threat. Marcus had betrayed her. Who else had? Who else was watching? Who else was waiting for her to make a mistake? "I do not know," Victoria finally admitted, the words tasting like failure on her tongue. "I do not know where we can be safe." Silence filled the truck cabin, broken only by the rumble of the old engine and the distant sounds of the city. Then Elena spoke for the first time, her voice so soft Victoria almost missed it. "My mama said angels hide in the places no one looks." Victoria's eyes found the little girl's in the rearview mirror. Elena was looking at her with an expression far too old for her young face, the expression of someone who had learned the worst truths about the world and survived anyway. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Victoria asked, surprised by the gentleness in her own voice. "Mama said when bad people are looking, you have to become invisible. You have to go where they think someone like you would never go." Elena's fingers tightened on her rabbit. "You have to stop being who they expect." The words hit Victoria like lightning. Stop being who they expect. She had spent her entire adult life being exactly who everyone expected, the ruthless CEO, the ice queen, the woman who valued profit over people. She had built that reputation deliberately, had wielded it like armor against a world that wanted to see her fail. And that reputation was exactly what was going to get her killed. Because those men searching for them right now, they were looking for Victoria Ashford, billionaire. They were tracking credit cards and penthouses and luxury vehicles. They were watching the airports and the hotels and every place a woman with $8 billion would run to. They were not looking for a woman in a beat-up truck driving through Queens at midnight with nothing but the clothes on her back. Victoria pulled into a 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh against the darkness. She killed the engine and sat there, staring at her reflection in the side mirror. Perfectly styled hair, designer silk blouse, diamond studs worth more than the truck she was sitting in. She looked like exactly who she was. "We need to disappear," Victoria said slowly, the plan forming in her mind even as she spoke. Completely. No credit cards. No phones. No trail. "That is impossible," Miguel said. "You are Victoria Ashford. Everyone knows your face." "Not everyone." Victoria reached up and pulled the diamond studs from her ears, dropping them into the cup holder. They clinked against plastic, $20,000 reduced to glittering trash. "The people who know me are in boardrooms and charity galas, but there are millions of people in this city who have never heard my name. To them, I am just another woman." She met Miguel's eyes, saw the doubt there, and the fear. "You said these people have connections everywhere. Money, power. They can track everything I have, everywhere I would normally go. So we do not go anywhere I would normally go." Victoria's voice hardened with determination. "We go to the places I have spent my whole life avoiding. The places a woman like me would never be caught dead in. Miss Ashford, my name is Victoria. Just Victoria." She opened the truck door, stepping out into the cold November night. "And right now, Victoria Ashford is dead. If we are going to survive, we need to become people those men will never think to look for." Miguel climbed out of the truck more slowly, Elena still clutched in his arms. The little girl watched Victoria with those enormous eyes, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of two people whose worlds had just been destroyed. "What do we do first?" Miguel asked. Victoria looked down at her silk blouse, her designer slacks, her bare feet in stockings that cost more than most people's groceries. She looked at Miguel's janitor uniform, at Elena's threadbare jacket. "First," she said, "we stop looking like ourselves." The gas station's bathroom was grimy and small, the fluorescent light flickering overhead. Victoria locked the door behind her and stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. For 43 years, this face had been her fortune and her prison. Beautiful, cold, untouchable. She reached for the scissors she had purchased with the last of the cash in her purse, $37. That was all the money she had in the world right now. The blades felt heavy in her hand. Victoria gathered her long dark hair, professionally styled at a salon that charged $800 per appointment, and began to cut. Strands fell into the stained sink like pieces of her old life. She cut until her hair hung in a choppy bob at her shoulders, uneven and harsh. It looked terrible. It looked nothing like the woman who had walked into her penthouse that afternoon. It looked perfect. She splashed cold water on her face, scrubbing away the remnants of her makeup. Without it, she looked younger, harder, tired in a way that boardroom Victoria never allowed herself to appear. When she emerged from the bathroom, Miguel was waiting by the truck with Elena. The little girl's eyes widened when she saw Victoria. "You look different," Elena whispered. "Good," Victoria said. "That is exactly what we need." She had purchased clothes from the gas station's limited selection, oversized sweatshirts, cheap jeans, a winter jacket that smelled like plastic, nothing that fit properly, nothing that looked intentional, nothing that looked like her. Miguel had changed too, replacing his uniform with similar gas station clothing. Together, they looked like exactly what they were trying to be: forgettable, ordinary, invisible. "Now what?" Miguel asked as they climbed back into the truck. Victoria started the engine, her hands steady on the wheel despite the chaos screaming inside her chest. She thought of her penthouse, probably being torn apart by those men right now. She thought of her office, where federal investigators would arrive tomorrow morning. She thought of Marcus and his betrayal, of everything she had built, crumbling to dust. And then she thought of Elena, trembling and silent in Miguel's arms, carrying trauma no child should ever bear. "Now," Victoria said, pulling out of the gas station and onto the dark street, "we figure out who those people are. We figure out what Elena's mother saw that got her killed, and we make them pay for every single thing they have taken from us." Miguel stared at her. "You want to go after them?" "I want to destroy them." The words came out flat and certain, and Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, something cold and sharp, and entirely focused. "They have taken my home, my safety, my life, and they are hunting a little girl who has already lost everything." She looked at Elena in the rearview mirror. The child was watching her with an expression Victoria recognized, because she had worn the same expression once, long ago, when her father had lost everything to corporate predators, and she had sworn she would never be powerless again. "No one gets to do that," Victoria said softly. "No one gets to hurt children and walk away. I do not care how much money they have. I do not care how many connections they have. We are going to find them, and we are going to make them wish they had never heard Elena's name." The truck rumbled through the empty streets, carrying 3 broken people toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the life Victoria had built burned to ash. Ahead of them, something else was beginning. Something that terrified her more than any assassin ever could. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was finally becoming the person she was supposed to be all along. The motel was called the Starlight Inn, though there were no stars visible through the smog and city lights, and the flickering neon sign had lost most of its letters, so it read S-R-I-N. Victoria pulled the truck into the cracked parking lot at 3:17 in the morning, the engine's rumble seeming too loud in the pre-dawn silence. Around them, the neighborhood pressed in with boarded windows and graffiti-tagged walls, the kind of place she had spent her entire adult life pretending did not exist. Now it was the only place that felt safe. "Stay here," Victoria said, killing the engine. "Keep the doors locked. If anyone approaches, drive away. Do not wait for me." Miguel's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "You should not go in alone." "I am less threatening alone." Victoria pulled free gently, aware of how Elena had tensed at the sudden movement. A woman checking in at 3 in the morning raises fewer questions than a woman with a man and a child. Trust me. She did not wait for his response. The cold November air bit through her cheap jacket as she crossed the parking lot, her new sneakers purchased at the gas station for $19, squelching through puddles that smelled like motor oil and decay. The motel office glowed with harsh fluorescent light behind security glass, scratched with years of desperate hands. A man sat behind the counter, maybe 60, with tired eyes and a cigarette burning between yellowed fingers. He looked up as Victoria entered, his gaze sliding over her chopped hair and discount store clothes with the assessment of someone who had seen every kind of human desperation. "Need a room?" His voice was gravel and smoke. "Yes, one night. Cash." Victoria pulled crumpled bills from her pocket. The last of her $37 supplemented by the emergency 100 she had found in her father's glove compartment. It felt surreal, counting out money like it mattered, like she could not simply wave a credit card and make problems disappear. The man took the cash without comment, sliding a registration card across the counter. Name? Victoria's pen hovered over the paper. She thought of all the aliases she had ever heard in movies, all the false identities that had seemed so dramatic and unnecessary in her previous life. Now her mind went blank, frozen by the weight of this moment. "What name did you give when your real name could kill you?" "Sarah," she said finally, the first name that came to her. "Sarah Mitchell." The man did not care. He took the card, handed her a key attached to a plastic tag with the number 7 stamped on it, and returned to his cigarette. No questions, no interest. No recognition of the woman who had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. Victoria had never felt more invisible in her life. Room 7 smelled like mildew and old cigarettes, the carpet stained with patterns Victoria did not want to imagine. A single bed sagged in the center, flanked by a dresser with missing drawers, and a television that looked like it had not worked since the 90s. The bathroom door hung crooked on its hinges. It was the worst place Victoria had ever slept. It was also, somehow, the first place in years that felt honest. Miguel carried Elena inside, the little girl still clutching her duct-taped rabbit. She had not spoken since her comment about angels hiding in overlooked places, and her silence felt heavier than words. Victoria locked the door behind them, engaged the chain, and pushed the dresser against the door for good measure. It would not stop determined assassins, but it might buy them seconds. Seconds could mean survival. "The bed is yours," Victoria said, gesturing to Elena. "You need sleep." The little girl stared at the sagging mattress, then at Victoria, her eyes reflecting something that made Victoria's chest ache. Elena shook her head, small and definitive. "I cannot sleep when it is dark," she whispered. "The dark is when the bad things happen." Miguel's expression cracked with pain. He knelt beside Elena, his large hands gentle on her small shoulders. "I will keep the light on, I promise. Nothing bad will happen here." "You cannot promise that." Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, resigned in a way no 8-year-old should ever sound. "Nobody can promise that anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria felt something twist inside her chest, a sensation she had not felt in years, buried beneath layers of business decisions and calculated risks. It took her a moment to recognize it. Empathy. "You are right," Victoria said, moving to sit on the floor beside Elena. The carpet was rough beneath her, probably harboring decades of bacteria, and the old Victoria would have recoiled in horror. The new Victoria did not care. "I cannot promise nothing bad will happen, but I can promise that if something bad tries to happen, I will fight it with everything I have. And I have a lot to fight with." Elena studied her with those enormous dark eyes. "My mama said rich people do not fight for other people. They only fight for money." The accusation stung precisely because Victoria knew how true it had been. How many times had she made decisions based purely on profit? How many times had she seen human cost as acceptable losses in the pursuit of greater returns? She had built an empire on calculated coldness. And it had brought her here to a roach-infested motel room with a terrified child who had every reason to believe the worst about her. "Your mama was right," Victoria said quietly. "About most rich people, about who I used to be." She met Elena's gaze without flinching. "But right now, I am not that person anymore. Right now, I am just someone who knows what it feels like to have everything taken away in one night, and I am angry about it. And I am going to use that anger to protect you." Elena's fingers loosened slightly on her rabbit. "Why?" "Because someone should have protected you before tonight. Someone should have stopped those men before they hurt your mama. And they did not. And that is unforgivable." Victoria felt the words rising from somewhere deep and raw inside her. "So I am going to fix it. Not because I am good, not because I am kind, but because I am very, very angry. And I know how to destroy people who deserve to be destroyed." Miguel made a sound, surprise, perhaps, or concern, but Elena nodded slowly, as if this logic made perfect sense to her damaged understanding of the world. "Okay," the little girl whispered. "You can help." It was not trust, not yet, but it was permission. And for now, that was enough. Elena finally lay down on the bed, still gripping her rabbit, still wearing her threadbare jacket. Victoria pulled the thin motel blanket over her, tucking it around her small frame with a gentleness she had forgotten she possessed. The little girl's eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling, but her breathing gradually slowed. Miguel watched from the corner, his face shadowed with exhaustion and something else. Grief, maybe, or guilt. "She will not sleep," he said quietly once Elena's eyes finally closed. though they all knew she was still awake beneath her lids. She has not really slept since I found her. Just moments here and there before the nightmares wake her. Victoria moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains at the parking lot below. The truck sat alone under a broken streetlight, and beyond it, the city sprawled in all directions, millions of people, any one of whom could be working for the men hunting them. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice low enough not to disturb Elena. "No more fragments. No more evasions. If we are going to survive this, I need to know exactly what we are running from." Miguel was silent for so long, Victoria thought he might refuse. Then he sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, and began to speak. Her mother's name was Carmen Ruiz. She worked as a housekeeper for a private security company, the kind that caters to very wealthy clients who value discretion above all else. 3 weeks ago, Carmen was cleaning an office in their headquarters downtown. It was late. She was alone. And she heard something she should not have heard. What did she hear? A conversation about a shipment, not drugs, not weapons, something worse. Miguel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Children. A trafficking operation moving through the port. High-value targets, they called them. Kids from wealthy families who would be ransomed. Kids from poor families who would just disappear. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Jesus Christ. Carmen panicked. She tried to leave, but she knocked over a trash can. They heard her. They chased her, but she made it out of the building. She ran home, grabbed Elena, and tried to disappear. Miguel's hands were shaking now. But these people, they have connections everywhere. They tracked Carmen's phone. Her credit cards. They found her 3 days ago, shot her in an alley while Elena hid behind a dumpster. And Elena saw them, Victoria said. The pieces falling into place. She saw their faces. She heard their names. An 8-year-old girl who can identify the people running a multi-million-dollar trafficking operation. Miguel looked up, his eyes red. They will never stop hunting her. Never. She is the only witness who can destroy them. Victoria's mind was already working, cataloging information, building strategies. The microphones in my apartment. They knew Elena was there. They knew you had hidden her in the building. I was careful. I only brought her during my night shifts when the building was empty. But I must have made a mistake, said something, done something that caught their attention. Miguel's voice cracked, and when they could not find her in the building, they must have decided to search the residences, starting with yours. Why mine specifically? Because you own the building. Because you have the most to lose if a child trafficking operation is connected to your property. They probably thought you would be an easy target, rich enough to be blackmailed, isolated enough to be vulnerable. Miguel laughed bitterly. They did not expect you to come home early. They did not expect you to run. Victoria turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind it, the ugly motel room, the sleeping child, the terrified man who used to be one of the monsters. You said you used to be one of them, she said. Explain that. The silence stretched. Then, I was a fixer for wealthy criminals for 12 years. When their operations got messy, I made the mess disappear. Evidence. Witnesses. Problems. Miguel's voice was hollow. I was very good at it. I made a lot of money. And then, one day, I was asked to dispose of a problem that turned out to be a 16-year-old girl who had seen too much. She begged me not to hurt her. She told me about her little sister, about her dreams of becoming a teacher. Victoria waited, barely breathing. I let her go. I told my employers she was dead, and then I disappeared, changed my name, took the lowest profile job I could find, became invisible. Miguel looked at Elena's sleeping form. I thought I could hide from what I had been. But when I found Elena in that dumpster, covered in her mother's blood, I realized you cannot hide from your past. You can only try to balance the scales. By protecting her. By dying for her if necessary. It is the least I owe, for all the people I did not save. By 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Victoria absorbed this, processing the man sitting before her with new understanding. A killer trying to become something else, a monster seeking redemption through a terrified child. Not so different from her own transformation, perhaps. "We need information," Victoria said, her mind shifting into strategic mode. "We need to know who these people are, who runs the operation, where they operate from, every detail we can find." "How? We have no phones, no computers, no access to the resources you are used to." Victoria smiled grimly. "We have something better. We have the fact that they think we are running scared. They are looking for a panicked billionaire making mistakes. They are not looking for someone hunting them back." She moved away from the window, pacing the small room with growing determination. "Tomorrow, we find a library, public computers that cannot be traced to us. We research the security company Carmen worked for. We dig into their contracts, their clients, their operations. We find the weak points." "That is insane. We should be running as far from this city as possible." "Run where?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "They have connections everywhere. You said so yourself. They will find us eventually. And when they do, we will still be just as powerless as we are now." She stopped pacing, facing Miguel directly. "Or we can do what they do not expect. We can become the hunters instead of the hunted. We can gather evidence, build a case, and destroy them before they destroy us." "You are talking about taking down a trafficking operation. These are not just criminals, Miss Ashford. These are people with armies, with resources that make your billions look like pocket change." "Then we get creative." Victoria's jaw set with determination. "I did not build a company from nothing by playing it safe. I built it by finding my opponent's weaknesses and exploiting them ruthlessly. And these people have weaknesses. Everyone does." Miguel stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You really are insane." "Probably." Victoria allowed herself a small smile. "But I am also very, very motivated. And I am excellent at destroying people who underestimate me." A sound from the bed made them both freeze. Elena had rolled over, her eyes open and fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "My mama tried to tell someone," the little girl said softly. "She called the police. They said they would help. But the next day, the bad men found us. Someone told them where we were. The implication hung between them like a blade." "Then we tell no one," Victoria said. "Not the police, not the FBI, not anyone in authority, until we know exactly who can be trusted. We do this ourselves." "3 people against an army," Miguel said. "A billionaire who just lost everything, a former criminal, and a traumatized child." "Yes." Victoria met his eyes steadily. "But they have something to lose. Power, money, freedom. We have already lost everything that matters. That makes us more dangerous than they can possibly imagine." The first light of dawn was beginning to creep through the gaps in the curtains, painting the dingy room in shades of gray. Victoria looked at Elena, at Miguel, at the reality of what she was proposing. She was volunteering to go to war against people who killed children without hesitation, people with unlimited resources and no conscience, people who would torture them for information before they died. The old Victoria would have calculated the odds, determined the risk was unacceptable, and run. The new Victoria, the one who had cut off her hair in a gas station bathroom, who had tucked a blanket around a frightened child, who had seen real evil for the first time in her privileged life, felt something else entirely. Rage. Pure and focused and absolutely certain. "Get some rest," she told Miguel. "Both of you. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." "What about you?" Victoria returned to the window, watching the sun begin to rise over the city that had once belonged to her. "I will keep watch. Someone needs to." She did not mention that she could not sleep even if she tried, that every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elena's mother dying in an alley, saw children in the dark holds of ships stolen from their lives and families, saw the men who made that horror possible, walking free, believing they were untouchable. They were wrong. Victoria Ashford had built an empire by being ruthless, calculating, and absolutely merciless to her enemies. Those men had just made the worst mistake of their lives. They had given her an enemy worth destroying, and they had given her something even more dangerous than anger or resources or power. They had given her a reason to care. The public library opened at 9 in the morning, its heavy doors swinging wide to admit the city's forgotten homeless men seeking warmth, elderly women clutching romance novels, students too poor for laptops. Victoria walked through those doors with Elena's small hand gripped tightly in hers, Miguel following close behind. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be truly invisible. No one looked at them. No one saw anything worth noticing. It was perfect. The computer bank sat in the back corner, ancient machines that wheezed to life with painful slowness. Victoria claimed a terminal, while Miguel settled Elena at a nearby table with coloring books the librarian had provided. The little girl held a crayon like it was fragile, her movements cautious, as if the simple act of drawing might shatter and bring the monsters back. Victoria's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. Once she started searching, once she left a digital trail, even an anonymous one, there would be no going back. They would either find what they needed to survive, or they would lead their hunters right to them. She typed, "Sentinel Security Solutions." The screen filled with results. Corporate website, LinkedIn profiles, news articles praising their discretion and effectiveness. A company that catered to Manhattan's elite, providing protection for those who valued privacy above all else. On the surface, they looked legitimate, professional, trustworthy. Victoria knew better. Monsters always wore nice suits. She dug deeper, following threads that most people would miss: business filings, partnership agreements, shell companies linked to offshore accounts. Years of building her empire had taught her how to read the language of hidden money, and what she found in Sentinel's financials made her blood run cold. Millions flowing through subsidiaries with innocuous names, contracts with shipping companies that operated out of ports known for lax security, connections to real estate holdings in countries with weak trafficking enforcement. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. A trafficking network disguised as a security company. "Miss Ashford." Miguel's voice was urgent, quiet. "Look." Miguel's voice. End quote. Victoria glanced up. At the library entrance, two men in dark suits were talking to the security guard. Professional, calm, showing something on their phones, a photograph, probably. Her photograph. "They are here," Miguel whispered. "How did they find us?" Victoria's mind raced through possibilities. They had not used credit cards, had not made calls, had not left any digital trail, unless... Her eyes snapped to the computer screen. The search history. She had been careful, but not careful enough. If they had monitoring systems, watching for searches related to Sentinel security, if they had algorithms tracking unusual research patterns. "We need to leave," Victoria said, her voice deadly calm. "Now. Do not run. Do not draw attention. Just walk." She logged off the computer, erasing her session with hands that refused to shake, despite the terror clawing at her throat. Elena was already gathering the coloring books, her movements quick and practiced. A child who had learned to run before she learned to feel safe. They moved toward the side exit, three people trying desperately to blend into the morning crowd. Victoria kept her head down, her chopped hair falling across her face, her cheap jacket pulled tight. Just another struggling mother with her family, nothing worth noticing. They were 10 feet from the door when one of the men turned. His eyes swept the library, professional and thorough. Victoria felt his gaze pass over them once, twice, then lock on. Recognition flashed across his face. His hand moved toward his jacket. "Run," Victoria commanded. They burst through the side exit into an alley reeking of garbage and decay. Victoria's sneakers slapped against wet pavement as she ran. Elena's hand clutched in hers, Miguel's heavy breathing behind them. The sounds of pursuit followed, shouting, footsteps, the mechanical click of a weapon being readied. A gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet struck brick inches from Victoria's head, sending fragments of stone exploding across her vision. She jerked left, pulling Elena with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Another shot, this one closer. They were going to die in an alley, just like Carmen. "This way," Miguel gasped, dragging them toward a fire escape. "Up! Go up!" Victoria pushed Elena toward the ladder, watching the little girl climb with terrifying speed born of pure survival instinct. Miguel followed, then reached down to pull Victoria up just as the men rounded the corner below them. They scrambled up the fire escape, metal rattling beneath their weight, lungs burning with exertion and fear. 3 floors, 4, 5. The roof stretched out before them, a landscape of gravel and air conditioning units and water towers that belonged to a world most people never saw. The world of people running for their lives. Victoria's legs screamed as they ran across the rooftop, jumping gaps between buildings, sliding across loose gravel that threatened to send them tumbling to the street below. Behind them, the men were closing in younger, faster, trained for this kind of pursuit. "We cannot outrun them," Miguel panted, and Victoria heard the resignation in his voice, the acceptance of what was coming. But she refused to accept it, refused to let Elena die on a rooftop after everything they had survived, refused to let monsters win simply because they were stronger. Victoria's eyes scanned the roof desperately, looking for something, anything that could shift the odds. A weapon, an escape route, a miracle. What she found was a maintenance door hanging open, leading down into darkness. "There!" she gasped, pointing. They changed direction, sprinting for the door. Elena reached it first, disappearing into the shadows without hesitation. Miguel followed. Victoria was 3 feet away when a hand grabbed her jacket, yanking her backward with brutal force. She hit the gravel hard, air exploding from her lungs. The man loomed over her, his face twisted with professional coldness. The gun in his hand pointed at her forehead with absolute steadiness. "Where is the girl?" His voice was calm, pleasant, almost. The voice of someone who killed for a living and slept just fine afterward. Victoria's mind went blank with terror. This was it, the end. After everything, the running, the fighting, the desperate hope that they could somehow survive it, ended here, on a rooftop, with a stranger's gun and absolutely no way out. Then Miguel exploded from the doorway. He hit the man like a freight train, sending them both sprawling across the gravel. The gun skittered away, spinning across the roof. Victoria scrambled for it, her hands closing around cold metal, just as the second man emerged from behind a water tower. She had never held a gun before, never wanted to, never imagined a scenario where she would need to. But when that man reached for his weapon, when she saw him prepare to shoot Miguel, when she thought of Elena hiding in the darkness below, Victoria pulled the trigger. The recoil shocked her, sending pain jarring up her arms. The bullet went wide, missing the man entirely but close enough to make him dive for cover. It gave Miguel the seconds he needed to grab the first man's weapon, to press it against the man's temple with hands that knew exactly how to kill. "Do not move," Miguel commanded, his voice transformed into something cold and dangerous. "Do not breathe. Do not think about being a hero, or I will paint this roof with your brain." The man froze. The second man stayed behind cover, clearly reassessing the situation now that his advantage had vanished. Victoria stood on shaking legs, the gun heavy in her hands. She had just shot at another human being, had tried to kill someone. The realization should have horrified her, should have broken something inside her that could never be repaired. Instead, she felt nothing but grim satisfaction. "Miguel," she said quietly, "we need answers." Miguel hauled the man to his feet, the gun never wavering from his target. "Who sent you?" The man's smile was condescending. "You think I will tell you anything? You think you can fight us? We own this city. We own the police, the judges, the politicians. You are nobody. Just 3 insects that need to be crushed." "Wrong," Victoria said, stepping closer. "I am Victoria Ashford. I have $8 billion. contacts in every major institution in this country, and more lawyers than your organization has hired killers. And right now, I am very, very motivated to destroy everything you represent." The man's smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough to show he recognized the name. "You cannot win," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "There are too many of us, too much money, too much power." "Money?" Victoria's laugh was harsh. "You think money impresses me? I have more money than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. Money is just numbers. But you know what I also have? Evidence. Your trafficking routes, your client lists, your financial records, everything I just downloaded from that library computer before you interrupted me." It was a bluff, a complete fabrication. She had not downloaded anything. But the man's face went white. And in that moment, Victoria knew she had found the truth. "The data is encrypted and stored somewhere you will never find it," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "And if anything happens to me, to Miguel, or especially to that little girl, if Elena Ruiz so much as gets a scratch, that information goes to every major news outlet in the country. Your clients get exposed. Your network collapses. Your bosses go to prison for the rest of their lives." "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Victoria met his eyes with the same cold calculation she had used in 1,000 boardroom negotiations. "I built a company from nothing by understanding leverage, by knowing exactly how to destroy my enemies. You think I would run without setting up insurance? You think I am stupid enough to be defenseless?" The man's jaw clenched. Behind the water tower, his partner had stopped moving, clearly listening to every word. "So here is what happens next," Victoria said. "You go back to your bosses. You tell them that Victoria Ashford has evidence that will destroy them. You tell them that the only reason I have not released it yet is because I want something in return. What do you want? Time, safety, the ability to disappear completely with Elena and Miguel. We vanish, they never hear from us again, and their operation continues undisturbed." Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Or they can keep hunting us, keep trying to kill a child. And when I die, and I will die eventually, we all do that. Evidence gets released automatically. Their empire burns to ash, and they spend the rest of their miserable lives in federal prison." Silence stretched across the rooftop. The morning sun had climbed higher, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere below, life continued. People going to work, buying coffee, complaining about traffic. Normal life, the life Victoria would never have again. "You do not have any evidence," the man said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Then call my bluff, kill us, and find out what happens." Victoria gestured with the gun toward the roof access. "Or deliver my message and buy everyone more time to figure out a solution that does not end in mutually assured destruction." Miguel was watching her with something like awe in his eyes. Elena had emerged from the doorway, standing in the shadows but listening to every word. The little girl's expression was unreadable. Finally, the man nodded. Slowly, carefully. "I will deliver your message. But this does not end here. You know that, right? My bosses do not negotiate with people who threaten them." "Then maybe it is time they learn." Victoria stepped back, allowing Miguel to release the man. "You have 48 hours. After that, I start making phone calls to journalists, starting with the ones who would love nothing more than to expose a billionaire-connected trafficking ring." The two men backed away slowly, never taking their eyes off Victoria and Miguel. When they reached the roof access, they disappeared into the building, leaving behind only the smell of cordite and the echo of threats unspoken. Victoria's legs gave out the moment they were gone. She sank to the gravel, the gun clattering from her nerveless fingers. Her entire body was shaking so hard, her teeth chattered. She had just negotiated for their lives, with nothing but a bluff and sheer audacity. And somehow, it had worked. "Miss Ashford Victoria," Miguel corrected himself, kneeling beside her. "What you just did was insane," Victoria finished. "I know." But they believe I have evidence. And as long as they believe it, we are valuable alive. We buy time. Time for what? Victoria looked at Elena, standing in the doorway with her duct-taped rabbit clutched to her chest. The little girl who had lost everything, who deserved justice more than anyone Victoria had ever known. Time to actually get the evidence, Victoria said quietly. Time to build a real case. Time to figure out how to destroy these people properly. She met Miguel's eyes. I bluffed today, but I am going to make that bluff real. I am going to infiltrate their organization, gather proof, and burn them to the ground. That is impossible. You are wanted. They know your face. They know Victoria Ashford's face, the billionaire, the CEO. Victoria touched her chopped hair, her cheap clothes, her new identity forged in desperation. But Sarah Mitchell? She is nobody, just another struggling woman trying to survive. And nobody pays attention to nobody. Understanding dawned in Miguel's expression. You want to go undercover, inside Sentinel Security. They are hiring. I checked their website. Administrative positions, cleaning staff, low-level security. Victoria's voice hardened with determination. I am going to get myself hired. I am going to work my way into their system. And I am going to collect every piece of evidence needed to prosecute every single person involved in trafficking children. They will recognize you eventually. Maybe. Probably. Victoria stood on shaking legs, forcing strength back into her body through sheer will. But by the time they do, it will be too late. The evidence will be real. The insurance will be real, and they will be finished. Elena approached slowly, her small hand reaching out to touch Victoria's. My mama tried to stop them. She died trying. I know. Victoria knelt to Elena's level, looking into those dark, wounded eyes. And I cannot promise I will survive either. But I can promise that if I die making sure they pay for what they did to your mother. I die making sure no other children end up like you, scared, and alone, and running for their lives. You promise? I promise. Elena studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she held out the duct-taped rabbit. His name is Mateo. Mama gave him to me when I was scared. He helps. Victoria's throat closed with emotion. She accepted the rabbit with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the gift, the trust it represented. I will keep him safe. I will keep you safe. Okay. Elena's voice was small but steady. Then I believe you. The three of them stood on that rooftop as the city woke up around them. Three broken people bound together by trauma and determination. Victoria held a stuffed rabbit worth nothing and everything. Miguel carried weapons and guilt in equal measure. Elena wore courage that no child should need. They had 48 hours before the men came back. 48 hours to turn a bluff into reality. 48 hours to become the weapon that would destroy a trafficking empire. It was not enough time. It would have to be enough. Let us go, Victoria said, tucking the rabbit carefully into her jacket. We have work to do. They descended from the roof together, leaving behind the morning sun and the bloodless battlefield where Victoria Ashford had died, and something fiercer had been born in her place. A woman with nothing to lose. A woman with everything to fight for. A woman who had finally found a purpose worth more than billions. Below them, the city sprawled infinite and indifferent. Somewhere in its shadows, monsters were meeting, calculating, planning their next move against three people who had dared to fight back. But Victoria was planning too, and she had learned something crucial on that rooftop, something that shifted the entire game. Monsters feared exposure more than death, and she was about to give them both. The endgame had begun.